Before there was conquest, there was kuleana. We gather here not just to remember, but to reclaim. This is not entertainment. This is nation building through our mo'olelo, scene by scene. So, aloha nui kako o Elena Farden. I'll be your moderator for this evening with this esteemed and celebrated panel. And with that, I wanted to go through a brief introduction, so I'm going to hand it over, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel.
Mahalo nui, and it is my honor to introduce a child of Kalihi Valley and a descendant of heirs proclaimed by King Kamehameha III, head of the Royal House of Hawaiʻi, Crown Princess, and Head of State, Her Royal Highness Princess Oana Ko'ohelelani Salazar. An additional panelist that wasn't featured on the flyer but is also joining us today is an esteemed cultural practitioner amongst many other hats, but as he acknowledges, father for those, uncle for others, and even grandpa too, one of the most important titles. And for those of us who learned from him, we just call him Kumu, but Kumu Ramsey Tam. Mahalo.
I have the wonderful opportunity to introduce the rest of our panel. To my left, I have Dr. Umi Perkins, scholar, historian, keeper of political memory, and Dr. Perkins brings a rare depth to tonight's conversation, not only as a Hawaiian historian and political scientist, but as someone whose genealogical ties to Lahaina, Ahupua, and Kona mirror some of the geographic complexities of the clan loyalties that define the era of Kamehameha. As the author of the upcoming Hawaiian history textbook, Mo'olelo, he helps us consider how power, unification, and betrayal are remembered and who gets to write that story for future generations. Dr. Umi Perkins. To his left, I have Pinane Moana Wong Karu, Kumuhula, filmmaker, cultural guardian, and known as many as Shark Goddess 808 if you don't already follow her on Instagram. Yeah. She brings a vital lens to tonight's panel, one that honors our kupuna, amplifies the mana of Moku and Moku Wahine voices, and reclaims mo'olelo through both hula and film. As a cultural practitioner, teacher, and award-winning filmmaker, Hina reminds us that true sovereignty isn't only forged through battle, but also through the fierce protection of identity, protocol, and story. So her presence today ensures we don't forget the gender-diverse ancestors who shaped our world long before the rise of Kamehameha. And kumuhina. And rounding out our panel at the end, we have Kersha Kaulukane Ilialani Durant, litigator, public defender, and olapa. And she enters tonight's discussion as a fierce legal advocate for the Lāhui, as someone who has stood both in the courtroom and on the pāhula, as a litigation director for the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, and in Olapa, formerly Uniki, right under Nā Kuhula, Carl Vito Baker, and Michael Kasupang. She embodies the intersection of legal justice, cultural continuity, reminding us that sovereignty is just as much about protecting our bodies, our lands, and laws as it is about honoring our ceremonial lineage. Everyone, Kersha Durant. So as we get into discussion, really one of the things that we really want to curate around and really get grounded into this is being able to have a serious community conversation about the film, the stories that we're seeing on the big screen, celebrate what was done right, but also have a very honest critique and learning about what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, and then of course have some shared meaning and community experience around this. So the first question I'd like to throw out to the panel as we get into these 4 areas of discussion is, and I'm wondering if we're also able to bring up the lights so that everyone can see our panelists. Is that possible? Can you get some popcorn of that? All right, so our first question I'd like to pose is, what responsibility does a film like Chief of War carry when it enters the global stage? And I'm wondering if I could start with Kumuhina first.
Mahalo. Wow. Curious question indeed to field this first one, because in my own film work, I made the global stage secondary to my sentiments about the fact that any Hawaiian film or Hawaiian-based film should represent itself to a level of integrity that would bring honor first and foremost to our people and to our islands and to our history. Now, with that said, when considering the global stage, I believe we've seen it play out here in Chief of War. The flurry of public comment that has gone on about who acted in the film, where was the film done, and many of these other interesting topics of debate and all too often contention. Some people will cater to the global palette, the outside world. They will cater to that first. I am someone who prefers to ensure that my own kupuna and my own genealogies would smile upon that work, first and foremost.
With that, I'll pass the mic over to Dr. Uli Perkins.
Keep it.
First, I want to acknowledge Jason Momoa for making this project happen. I've heard numbers of $340 million. So when we've had discussions, things like the proposed film on Kamehameha with Dwayne Johnson, there was a lot of discussion going back nearly 20 years about who would portray Kamehameha. Do they have to be a Hawaiian? Do they have to be a descendant of Kamehameha? All those things. And my position, as I learned more about the industry, is you have to have trained actors. Now, having said that, it was a bit painful to see all those Maori names on the screen at the beginning. But I come from a little personal position with this. My oldest child is an actor. Started at 7 years old and is now 22 and gets lead roles now, but it's been a very long road and very much training involved. And to think you can just discover someone, I think that's, even though that did happen with the Kamehameha character here, I just don't think that's realistic, the way the industry works. Just to look at the big picture, this is one of the sort of visions that the state of Hawaii has had for a future economy is the film industry, but like other industries, they have not invested in it. My oldest lives in New Mexico, and they have studios there in the desert. They put money into it. Netflix is there. It doesn't just happen by accident. And so, if we're going to have film, and it was starting to get going, we're going to have film as something that is a real industry in Hawaii, so that these stories can be told, our history can be told. Investment has to happen. That's what I stand
on. The global stage is taking secondary and also being able to invest in our creative industries. I'll pose the same question. I'll ask Princess Oana Salazar and Rangina Sophie Kershaw the same question. What does this film, or what kind of responsibility does a film of this weight of Chief of War carry into the global stage? Aloha. Aloha. What they said.
But truly, in all seriousness, I think what is most important is the honesty that is brought to the fore for us to absorb and see what others haven't seen. What the writers of Professor Williams said that 96% is by non-Hawaiians, and 4% of our history of here was by the actual Hawaiian people. So that honesty that comes from the living bones of who is telling the story. And that Jason Momoa has said that he is a descendant of Kaiana. So I imagine, I would honor the fact that he would more likely have some stories of his own ohana and his history from his own tutu and kupuna that he has shared. Some things we may not have seen or known. And as for the, they call him late professor, but the actors being Maori doesn't hurt because we are one family, we are Oceania, we are people of one entire country, and that is Oceania. The unity between us is what brings strength to the world. And let's remember that Netflix began as little rentals on the machine, and Amazon began as book purchases, and now look. So perhaps if we are displeased or waiting for the state of wait to come around, I don't think I want to wait. Why don't we start our own production and come up with this kind of creative, generative ideas for tomorrow and tomorrow's tomorrow, for our Mokupuni and those to come. Mahalo.
Mahalo for that question, and mahalo to those who organized this. I think this is such an important forum to have and a platform to discuss the global impact of these stories. You know, I think it's a moment to pause, and if there are things that we thought were done well as part of the sharing of this collective history of our Lāhui, then we need to reflect on that and how we can reinforce that moving forward. And if there are things that our community feels could be done differently or better, I think that's also a moment to pause and reflect on what that could look like. You know, I think our knowledge, you know, I know I was introduced in here, the Litigation Director in Hawaiʻi Corporation. So, you know, from the legal standpoint, when we think about things like film and stories that are put on film, we think about it from what people probably refer to as intellectual property, right? Copyright, trademark, trade, things like that, which is this idea of individual ownership, right? Which is distinct from how we as a community care for our stories, our history, our culture. And so I think for this movie, it's a moment to reflect on, are we achieving those goals? Is that in alignment with our concepts of collective stewardship of this type of moral level, and the imagery that it included? And if not, then it is a moment to reinvest in developing those formal ways of setting forth what is our understanding, what is pono, how we do it appropriately, and that we move forward applying that framework. So I kako was shared by everybody on this panel, but I think the biggest thing is it's a moment of reflection, I think.
And to what you said, I'd like to add that I found it quite eye-opening to realize as I watched it that perhaps this was the reason, the trickery that was set upon Kaiana by Kahekili, that is the reason why he turned against Kona and fought for Oahu. Maybe he felt he owed it to Kahana because he got hurt, you know, unfairly. It could be not maybe that he turned against Kamehameha, but was help Oahu because this is what happened, partly because he participated with Kahekili. Wow. I mean, think about it, perhaps next time you watch it, because how many of us have the opportunity in the PD side, yeah? But I thought that was quite fascinating, the reveal of the comparison what is written in Kamakao's ruling chiefs compared to what is told here. It didn't exactly say that. Thank you.
Wow. Really, I want to double stitch and build on what Kershaw was saying about things that perhaps the film got right, and also touching a little bit on intellectual property. As we're seeing here, the Ahupua, the Mahiole, all the cultural advisors that were on the film, Pohaku Stone with Honolulu sledding, Umikai with weaponry, the Lani Tanahe for kapa. So my question that I want to pose to the panel here, as we're thinking about this, is what did the film get right in representing our people in terms of history, in terms of language, in terms of protocol that we read about that happened on the film, but we may not see it within the film. Any of the intellectual property, cultural expressions that we see, what did the film get right? I'll start with Kershaw at the end, and we'll work our way back this way too.
I'll just say, I think people on this panel are probably more prepared to talk about what they got right, and what could be different, but I do think that when we look at this film, well, I'll say this, I saw an interview where Jason was talking about the film, and he talked about how this was one of the most difficult films he had ever been a part of because of the deep responsibility, the kuleana he felt about sharing this and this story, and that he knew that there would be people that were watching. I think that's something that makes this distinct, and that's why I'm talking about the global stage, because we need to think about when our stories are on the global stage, is that messaging reflective of a collective understanding of who we are, what our culture is. And again, if we've achieved that here, even in some small part or in entirety, then we need to look at that and build upon that. But if not, then that's the part where I hope it mobilizes people to think about and really get activated to start talking about how do we work as a community to protect these things. Because there's been efforts ongoing, people on this panel have been a part of those efforts to try and protect our image, to make sure that our culture is shared in a way that is consistent with our values. And this is a global scene, and there's somebody who had that sense of kuleana for how he was going to tell the story. Whether we all agree that he achieved that or not, he had that sense and that mindset. And there are other people that can tell our stories that won't have that mindset. So we need to think about those situations and how do we prepare as a community to protect against that. But also I think we need to feel comfortable within our community to talk about where we can improve things. And that's why I think these types of forums, which I hope provokes honest reflection and feedback about where we can improve, that I hope that that's what this film does.
You got my thoughts racing around, but hasn't Hawaii already been on the world stage for, over a century now? The world stage of promoting aloha as hello and goodbye, as opposed to the depth and the full ma'ona of aloha. So the discussion as to what to do now has to reach back as to what has taken place in all of these decades. I would like to challenge this matter of thinking that we go through of how to get through these walls of the state and the county and the federal. And remember that we are not just a community. We are a country. We are a people. We are reflections of where we have come from, and we reflect to where we are going. So I would put it right out there that really the protection we do seek, think about this, give you plenty time, but not too much, time is short. That consider the protections that were given to us as a country and a people under the crown of the constitutional monarchy. Read the constitutions, and actually, and it was called to our attention by my dear Kainoa here, that intellectual property was named in the 1848. What were the words again, please? Protection of,
protections of the products of the mind.
protections of the products of the mind. That's so far ahead. How much has Hawaii been ahead of the world, such as terracing our waters to farm food, to bring food to the table, and the protections of nature. So really, how much do we want to stay in that box or the cylinder, or whatever we want to call it, the limitations that other powers have imposed, and we have somehow been conditioned to agree to, whether it be our daily, what seems to be a more less major actions, such as putting a card in ATM machine, or the major things of composing a film or a piece of music or any art form. Thank you. Mahalo.
What did the film get right and what did it not get right? I will be someone that chooses not to approach looking at this film and this larger body of work from that vantage point for this reason. In my own film work, specifically with one of my most recent projects, it's called The Healer Stones of Maluhia. The homework that myself and my team did when we sat down to discuss all of the salient points that would emerge in the film, I said, I am satisfied that the information that we have collected is sufficient enough for me to get behind this as the primary cultural name endorsing this work and contributing to it. Likewise, I was a very minor consultant to this film, specifically to Paakaio Kahonua Civic. And I was simply someone that he could make a phone call to, and he asked my opinion on certain elements, not necessarily all that we're seeing here, but for other things while going down the engage with people. And so, my answer then, if I can focus it on why I feel this way, like in my own film work, it was members of our own Hawaiian community that not only scrutinized my film work the most, but I question our own people's ability to be that level of critic if the level of ike, the level of knowledge, is not commensurate with the level of commentary and criticism that is proffered. What does that mean in plain English? If you think that you have the kulana, if you think that you have the place to stand to say something, meaning that you're in the place or position to take on that kuleana of saying something, then it should be founded upon a level of ike. If you do not have a level of ike that can sufficiently speak with confidence and resolve, for example, I'll just tell you all that this and knowing all of the intimate details of this history, this was not one of my most favorite areas because it gets complex. And in order to really understand it, and in order for me to really want to tackle this, it goes beyond my personal desires and focuses in our culture. And so I choose not to take any issue with this because the cultural consultants, there was a consortium of people. And they contributed at the Olelo level, they contributed at the historical level, and may I remind everyone, Apohe pau ka ike, I ka halau ho'okahi. So just like how it was done for my own film work, I only responded with Apohe pau ka ike ka halau ho'okahi. The critics who criticized my work could not come up with anything to substantiate any of their assertions that they made. And therefore, it just made me say, oh well, then your comments are irrelevant. You know, and I can only be blunt in this room. If you and I don't have enough of a fluid level of understanding, then let's just keep our comments and let's just learn and avail ourselves. And if I want to know more, I'm not Dr. Umi Perkins. And so, he's far more astute in many of these specific areas of our history. I focus more on the language. So if you really want to know other thoughts, that was where I wanted to offer comments. But anyway, I think you all get the idea that, hey, ale lava kuho mapopo, ale lava kuho ike, hamau ko aha, pa'a ko aha, ale wala au. Mahalo nui ka mea I ana ia. And if we think we can do better, well then by all means, get over there and get going. Make your own film.
I just want to make a comment about myself as a commentator on the film. What right do we have to even do that? I think that's a question that comes up in the community. So one of the names, kind of the one that I associate most in my mo'okuaha is Makikau. And Makikau is a shortened version of the name Keli'i Makikau o Nu'uanu o Kona, which means the warlike chief of Nu'uanu Kona. And by Kona they mean Kona o Ahu, which is where we are right now, Kona. And so my great-great-grandfather was named after someone who was given that as a nickname, who we believe was his father. And his name was Naholu. And so as far as having the right to speak about this history, I think I have it. But let me approach the question this way. When I think of projects like this, my thoughts are always about how do I use this in the classroom. I've been teaching Hawaiian history for a quarter of a century at Kamehameha, and we are very much lacking in multimedia. There's a giant gap between Kamehameha II and the overthrow. There's literally no video for that. And students now, they need multimedia, can't just lecture all the time. And so, let's think of it this way. Compare this to another film that came out about Hawaiian history. Did anybody see Princess Ka'iulani? So, if we think about it in that sense, now to give you a sense of how bad that film was, the original title was supposed to be The Barbarian Princess. Okay, so there was a protest and they changed it to Princess Ka'iulani. So that's the approach they took. I don't show that film in class as much as I would like to, because it's not only wrong, it's everything in there is the opposite of what actually happened. And if you look it up online, it's listed as a historical romance, and then they invented a romance that never occurred. And it's just absolutely useless. So when you think about it, that's our baseline, right? Films like that, films like 51st Dates, right? Hawaiʻi, I think that was brought up in our Zoom session before. Hawaiʻi, the film based on James Michener's book. You go from Hawaiʻi in 1966 to 51st Dates in 2006. It's worse. There's no progress made. So the question about where are we going is a very, very important one, because progress doesn't necessarily happen. We can remain with these stereotypes and just not get ahead in the ways that we're talking about here. So when I think about it from the big picture, this is a huge step forward. It's very exciting. I think that everybody can feel the excitement, and things seem to kind of come together for this film as far as Kaiana, for example, is a very, very fascinating character. It's very unusual, I think. It's a strange turn of events that would be kind of the main character. And he's kind of a guy that we can speculate, but we can't ever get into his head. You know, what is he really thinking? When I wrote an article about him, I called it Kaiana the Defector. Well, why does he do that? We can never know really for sure. And so, producer will want to put himself as this, not the main character, right? The main character is really Kamehameha, but this side character who is so fascinating. I think that's an interesting take on it. I'm going to be spending every Monday talking to my students about, as the episodes come out, you know, this is a historic moment that way. There's never been anything like this, although there is a film called Mokupuni, which I recommend everybody should take a look at. That was a grassroots effort, and there's a lot of people who are in this also. So that one can be viewed on the website of Pacific Islanders Communication. I can say a lot more about that, but that's kind of the 5,000 feet level.
So from not having enough multimedia content here for stories that are about us, for us, to having a certain level of ike, of understanding, in order to have critical dialogue about things such as this that we're seeing on the big screen, to the sovereignty of us as a kingdom and being able to tell our own stories, and then getting deeper into intellectual property and why it's so important in these types of stories. The next question I want to pose for the panel, and you touched upon it, Dr. Perkins, was were there moments where cultural accuracy was compromised that we see, and maybe why? I'm not sure if that's something that's open to, so I'm going to leave it open to the panel. Whoever would like to jump at it first, if you have the mic. I'm looking at you, Kumina. I feel the energy coming from you.
Mahalo. I'm going to take it down the road of the olelo of the film. On one level, I have great appreciation for hearing our language being spoken. And that the subtitles require everyone to read in English what they were saying. So I'm always going to be a fan. That's at a very simplistic level. But I'm not just necessarily a simple person. With that said, my ears are attuned not only to academic learned Hawaiian, my ears are attuned far more to mana leo, Hawaiian language speakers. And in the way Hawaiian language speakers speak on the daily, the way Hawaiian language speakers speak in formal speech. There's formal speech in newspapers. There's formal speech in public places and spaces in history. Now, in 2025, the small remaining community of native language speakers that speak our language on the daily, it's limited, and it's usually mostly Olelo Kauhale, depending on who you're talking to, except one individual that I'm very close to grew up in a different house, the Halenui, and so her speaking is different from everybody else. At the end of my day, when I hear this, I just imagine that I might have other sentiments to offer, to try to contribute, because how do I say it? I must, as someone who can be extremely critical, but again, I'm not the driver behind this film. I just gonna appreciate it for all the work that went into it. For my own things that I deal with, so if you watch the work that I've done, I choose to narrate it because I'm proficient enough to do it. And the sound of that language is as I speak it with the other Mauna Leo people. Do I consider myself Mauna Leo? No. But do I have the proficiency at the level of Mauna Leo? Yes. Because I'm respected by that community and they don't treat me any different. And so, again, I took this path to go down about language, but that's, I think that when I look at it, I'm gonna turn it back on our community to wrap up my thought. Who in this room can speak our language? Hands up. Okay, mahalo. So for the rest of you, start. Learn one word a day, one word at a time. And make it a point so that on the whole, we uplift our community and we can receive this with even greater appreciation for what it means. And as we aspire to do more and contribute more, because teachers in the classroom daily need things, we have to have a pool of people that have the wherewithal to produce. Okay, sorry, thank you.
Question is open for the other panelists who would like to go next.
Lāhui. Oh, my God. No. Say. Think of it now. Mahalo for that. Oh, yes. I don't know that we can actually, I would agree with the comments already said, that we can begin to question whether something has been compromised if we don't have a particular standard to operate from. So let's operate from our own standard to say that something should be one way versus another. Now, to Kumu's question about those of us that speak our language, how many of us were here in 1895 or 1795? See, all of this is helpful for us because we weren't there to see any of this. This is a creative mind process. And to your earlier question, storytelling and the narratives that we've seen is our transfer of knowledge. Films made like this, and from Pacific Islanders and Communication and other groups, this is the way we tell our stories. And I think it's been said here, versus others telling the stories for us. Because if anything, we applaud the idea that our process of transferring knowledge through storytelling, this is just storytelling. And what it does, it captures the imagination as well as hopefully captures the content, the principles, the values of our kupuna. And not place everything in our culture in an entertainment, but that there is history. And to the first question, what are we building? Hopefully we're building to a place that the stories that are told in the future aren't just about the lua, the hula, You know, all those are great things. As Alohi Lua, I can say I was intrigued, I was interested, I was consulted early on about the Lua. But there are many schools, there are many ways, and unless we're there to actually apply these things, we're leaving it up to the creative minds and the consultants that supported that. So I'm not sure that anything was compromised. If anything was compromised, I go back to Professor Umi's suggestion earlier. If there was a compromise, finances to get the story required it to be filmed someplace else. And I would support the idea that at any point in time, the Hawaiʻi film industry is Hawaii, a national film industry, not a state film industry, in the way it is in Aotearoa, which is a nation practice, not a state practice. So I think we have many opportunities to begin to learn from this and build upon it. Mahalo.
Freshman, did you want to go since you took the mic? I'm just going to look at you and say yes.
Well, it's interesting because, like Muhina, there were moments as I listened, it's just the intonation, the emphasis is not what I'm attuned to hearing. But at the same time, I think that's the complexity of this, right? There are so many parts about it to be celebrated. But like we can still also celebrate those things and say, oh, maybe we can, you know, have a different level of consultation with respect to a level, you know, maybe, and still applaud the effort. That doesn't take away from the effort, at least from my personal perspective. And then I just wanted to reinforce when I talk about protocols, I think it's more that it kind of goes back to what we're talking about up here. If you don't have that, we shouldn't be commenting on it. But if we have, as a community, we develop a value system and protocols of how we think, what is appropriate, then it's not just a person, an individual saying, I didn't like this, or I thought this could have been done better. It's something that's based on a collective consensus. And so when I talk about, in the reality, for traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, that is the tool. There isn't laws that say, okay, as a community, we can go and bring lawsuits against people that misuse our image as a community, our collective history, our collective expression. But the ways that we can do that as a nation, as a community, is to agree on what those things are, what makes it well, what is appropriate. And then when there was a point where we say there maybe has been a departure from that, there's something principled and tangible to point to, and not just, I didn't like this, or I thought this wasn't good. And I think that's, when I say it's a moment of reflection, it's a moment of reflection on that. Like if there are gonna be things that people say, then that means we as a community need to think about that and understand why that is. Is that in alignment with our value systems? And as a nation, as a community, do we want to protect that by ensuring that it's not stewarded in that way? Because that's really all we can do at this point. So I mahalo the people that contributed to this. I mean, I think it's clear the level of consultation that happened. And I go back to what I said. I heard the interview, I heard about the thought process, the intention. And that all should be celebrated. But we can also use this to grow, to expand, to take it to the next level, and to ensure that our stories, we don't have to only wait for our stories to be told by somebody who has enough clout in the entertainment industry to do this. Because that's another thing I heard him say. He wanted to do this for a long time, but he had to wait. He had to wait until he had developed really the ability to limit the control that others were gonna have over how the film progressed. So that says something to it. That's a priority of how we as a community want to be portrayed in storytelling on a global level. Then we as a nation, we as a community have to invest in the resources to support that effort, to support the people that tell our stories in these ways, to support the industries that allow that to happen, So the fact that we don't is maybe a point of inflection too, of what is our value system about how we steward that image at that stage.
Well, I'm hearing the larger thread in this, a collective investment, collective consensus grounded in collective knowledge, but also investment in our Hawaiian language, so we have more that speak, so we have more that create. I'm going to ask Princess Oana Salazar, and then we'll end with Dr. Umi Perkins with the same question.
At this point, I'd like to ask you to repeat the question.
Sure. The question was, what was some of the moments within the film that we saw within the 2.5 that parts were compromised and why? It could be language, it could be historical accuracy, storytelling, if any.
Well, the only thing that I saw really, because I'm not, well, I noticed that the woman who played Queen Ahupua, well, of course she's still a young woman, not yet queen, was a towel across here. And I happen to know that Queen Ahupua had not had one. So perhaps they didn't, because they didn't appropriate, I don't know. It's not something I want to complain about really, because the story to me is more important. It was intriguing that the seer, the kaula that was there was foretelling, you know, and we don't know whether that really happened, but maybe it could have. And so again, and the other part that did definitely intrigue me was when I realized that Kahikili, the ambition of these chiefs of the wars, that really puts it into perspective as to what was happening throughout my times of talking the story with my close friends and others of history. The presence of Kamehameha I just blew it out of the water. I mean, if I can say it like that, because by having so much war, he put an end to war. That's irony in our own history. And that he became known as the chief with the black bat after the last of the wars was fought. And he's tilling the fields and pulling the kalo and doing all that, so that his back is now black with the sun. That's honorable. Yet some people as people were still angry. Generations later, why? Because they said that Kamehameha pushed his ancestor off the cliff. And when I had to deeply think about these things, and I'm not really answering the question, but I want to share this, I asked myself, wow, how can that be? There's still something in there, so maybe that's why one of the many reasons we must ho'oponopono, because it begins in ourselves. Ho'oponopono, yeah, is the master over here. One of the well-known people. And yet, it put an end to all the wars. And then there was peace until, right? So, this were a lot of things brought up in my thinking of what has taken place in my thoughts because of the movie and the ambition of these warring chiefs to become that one that was demonstrated in this telling of this story of Kahikili, who wanted to be that star, but he wasn't. And then he tricked Ka'aiana into the war on Oahu, the senseless, unnecessary war, because he just wanted to take another island. Until Kamehameha came and took care of that. Yet it's his own uncle. One of the things when I was a long time ago, and I'm old enough to say that now, that when I got to know Francis Ching, who was the Pukawa Nui with the Order of Kamehameha I, and Wayne Kyotomanu Davis, who was the Ku'auhau Nui, the master genealogist, that he said it wasn't a war, it was a family feud. When you look into the genealogies, these are cousins fighting, and uncle and nephew, and yet they say these different kingdoms. I ventured there are chiefdoms, but and even my complaint is, so we have only 2 rankings, chief, high chief, chiefess, high chiefess, when there was a longer, much more deeper, fulfilling roles of each leader. We didn't only see 2 mahiole coming down that field, we saw 10 or more, whatever, yeah. And there are different ranks shown by their ahupua and their helmets, mahiole. So amazing to comprehend this fullness of this culture and the reasons to contemplate what happened with the wars and the coming to the end of the wars, at least in that time. You know. And as for, did you say, Professor, that there wasn't much about King Kamehameha II? Did I, for video, okay. I have an idea, I'll tell you later. But mahalo for that, for the question. And I am particularly enthused by this film. Mahalo.
Yeah, I'm going to get a bit into the nitty gritty, but I'm doing it because it's something right at the beginning I think is pretty important. And I think I know why they did this. So when Kalaniʻupule explains Ka'aiana that Oahu is a Mexican army and they're going to invade and they're this big threat, that's just not how it was. In fact, the boy king, Kahahana, was actually placed there by Kahekili. Oahu knew that it was relatively weak. They knew they couldn't fight off the armies of Hawaiʻi and Maui, and they would eventually be conquered. So to sort of keep Kahekili at bay, they asked for a ruling chief. They banished their own ruling chief, which is Kumahana. He went off to Kauai. I guess that's where they go. And they said as long as he has long bloodlines. So that's the boy, Ali'i Opio, that they're mentioning in the story. So he comes in, and then Kahekili starts asking him for pieces of land. He asks for kualoa. And I think that's the Eastern stronghold that's mentioned in the story, Kualoa, which is a Kualoa. And so this idea that Oahu was amassing an army and they're going to invade Maui, that's just not what was happening. And I think everybody knew that. I'm pretty sure everybody knew that. And so why did they tell the story that way? I think they needed some kind of premise to pull Ka'aiana in, because we don't really know that much about Ka'aiana. There's a couple of articles about him. He's not really a major character in the history, so they have to have this origin story. And so they needed something to pull Ka'aiana into the wars, and that's what we see there, but it's more of a plot device. And so I think that's why they did it. And so, but to just go back to the positive, I agree that the big picture is held to, meaning that, and I'm seeing this mostly from trailer type promo material, that this idea that Hawaii cannot be divided with the encroachment of Western powers. You know, Kamehameha got on Cook's ship when he was about 20. He saw the guns, he saw the superiority of the material culture, and he kind of knew that divided they would fall. So I think that piece seems to be captured in the series, and that's really the main thing, more so than the details like these plot twists. There is one final twist. One thing they left out, they mentioned the kahuna nui of Oahu. They don't mention his name. It was Ka'opulupulu. And the politics between Ka'opulupulu, the senior advisor advising the teenage king, he's literally about 16, somewhere between 14 and 17, where he's ruling, doesn't know enough. So Ka'opulupulu is very important. And he's the one who tells him, don't give Kahekili Kualoa, because otherwise you can kiss your kingdom goodbye. And they have a falling out, and Ka'opulupulu kind of marches to his death, and his son is with him, and the son is killed at Pu'uloa, Pearl Harbor, and at that moment, Ka'opulupulu puts a curse on Oahu. And so it makes me wonder if that's why we're sitting here in basically Babylon, right? Between here and Pu'uloa is basically Babylon. And maybe that curse, something needs to be done to get that curse lifted, if you believe in that sort of thing. And I think the film does do a good job of bringing a little bit of Hawaiian worldview, because there's two ways to look at it. A way that Westerners can understand politics and economics, politics meaning power, economics meaning resources, and there's a Hawaiian way which brings in religion. So, just a little preview, Keoa is going to be coming into the series, and that is played by Cliff Curtis, very great Maori actor. And at one point, he will cut off the tip of his penis at Pu'ukohola. And I always ask my students, would the President of the United States ever do this? No, because it only makes sense. It only makes sense within a Hawaiian perspective, right? So there's those things that only make sense, and I'm looking forward to see how the series brings that perspective in, because that's, in some ways, even more important than the history. That's our contribution to the world's understanding of how to get out of the crisis that we've got ourselves into. Indigenous mindset.
Hello to our esteemed and celebrated panelists. We are very close to the hour of our time together. We also want to do time for question and answers with our audience. One more thing. One last question I want to pose to the panel for our closing. I'm going to ask, and also Ramsey Tom joining our panel. But one last question to close us, in order for us to transition to the audience with their deep questions. I do believe that learning is in the debrief, learning is in the reflection. We want to get to those. So the question I pose to the panel, and this will be for just one person to answer. So it'll be amongst you to choose how you guys want to do this. You guys can cut in on it and then fight it out. Who will answer this question to close our panel? And the question is, what kuleana do you carry forward now that chief of war exists in the world?
Don't jump at once, everybody. I wanted to answer the question in a second, but I do want to add something, a distinction to be made between this Kiowa that is mentioned by Professor Omi Perkins. That is Kiowa Ku'ahu'ula, not the Kiowa Nui of Kalani Kupua Pa'i Kalani Nui. And just to make sure that that distinction is made when it comes to who was sacrificed at Ku'ula and why. The backstory had to do with Ku'ahu'ula's own misdeeds along Kamakua while they were off Loring and Big Island, no, Maui. And if you want to learn more, go and read Willie Chiefs. But as for the kuleana, I carry forward with this, and mahalo for the question, and mahalo for the reveal of these kinds of mo'olelo that carry farther than we know, and into what we didn't know, and maybe we know now, or we feel we do. My kuleana is I'm in the process of writing a script, and I will reveal stories of my family and my great-grands that are not known today, that needs to be known, that stories that must be told. So that really became more of a kuleana to me than listening to Kumuhina express such. So she knows I will be calling you from Kukua with the support and things, you know. And one interesting thing came to mind, and I propose this because, you know, in thinking about who's Manaleo and who knows, 30 years from now, 10 years from now, you know how we look at old films and we start laughing like, oh, so long ago. This is how they're talking. There's going to be more and more of us and we who olelo naturally. Me, I'm fluent in song. My practice of speaking back and forth, very little. But song is where I hear. So I'm listening to how the music is coming out of what they're speaking. I'm not hearing a lot of music. I'm getting words. But so 30 years from now, 50 years from now, looking back, people who are there watching, your children, my children, mo'opunas, who will be fluent and who will be manaleo, we're going to go, oh, look at what they listened to back then. Yeah, it's kind of funny, huh? But we can laugh at it. Because why? We can laugh at ourselves. We can be the humor between ourselves. It's okay, because we're growing and knowing together.
Mahalo nui, mahalo nui. I'm going to turn this time over to Helani and Lāhui, Hawaiʻi. Open it up for question and answer.
Just let me know, just raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. Thank you.
And as you're thinking about your question, think about the conversations that have been had up here with the panel. Think about your question that you want to ask. Something deep, something that ends with a question mark that we really want to have a conversation about too.
I just wanted to know how the panel would feel about like one of these days having a Hawaiian language movie festival and asking Punana Leo to share their videos like Kailau Okikua, Karimainu'u, and also the Charter School of Nihao, that when they need their film Kalua Oko'olau, I mean, just having a Hawaiian language movie at a night or festival where people can listen and enjoy and appreciate that the stories and the mo'olelo and the movies that we did have before Chico Born. And I'm not saying that I don't like Chico Born, I'm just saying that there were movies before that had blood, sweat, and tears from a low budget kind of arena. And so I just wanted to ask the panel, how would you feel like if we did have a Olelo Hawaiʻi film festival? Mahalo.
I just have a quick comment, which is as someone who I've worked on a film before, and some of the complexities of it, it's hard to grasp if you haven't done it. But one thing that I like to do is watch films in languages I can't speak, and then I read the subtitles. What I noticed about this is that it was a very non-literal translation. Quite different what they're saying in Hawaiian versus the subtitles. And if we had something like this film festival, literal subtitles would help for those people who are trying to learn the language that way. And there's programs for that for other languages. There's something called Lingopi, which is like Netflix for learning, Spanish and French and things like that. Some people might disagree, but I find it very interesting watching this. That what they're saying is pretty different from the English, of the indirect translation. But for learning, it might be better to have it. That's my.
To contribute a response to the question posed, I actually personally think that it's high time that in and amongst our Hawaiian language community, especially amongst the academics, not only at the higher learning levels, the universities, as well as our teachers from Papamala'o until Kulaki'ikie, the 12th grade. I think that we as a collective need to gather and consider, take an assessment and look and say, this is where we've brought our language and our ability till today. How can we improve on this? Because then asking that question will hopefully elicit responses from people like myself to say we need to look closely and listen even more closely than what many have done so far, because listening to Manaleo speak is key. And when you learn how Manaleo speak, you also learn how they think. As someone who speaks in descending order of ability, Tongan, Samoan, and Tahitian, like I said, in descending order, when I'm around other Polynesian language speakers and I'm around Manaleo, there's far more connected threads that run concurrent throughout. Then it gets different when it comes into the larger body of our language speakers of the modern context. Am I saying that it's bad? Am I saying it's poor? Am I saying that it's not my body? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I am saying that there's been great effort to ensure that our language would not fade away, would not die, but much emphasis has been placed on elements of our language that now need to grow and to become more inclusive of the sound, the intonation, the cadence, and the subtle nuances that make that language capture and distill the spirit of a people when it is spoken. And so when speaking in our mother tongue, and then I listen to other, like I can literally sit there and watch videos. I can sit there and listen to Puka, Rorotonga, Atiu, and I watch them, and then move over to Samoa, then move over to Tonga, then Upea, Tuvalu, and I just listen, because it's like, well, I'm not trying to promote people to do drugs, but it's like crack for me. Like I sit there, that's a really shitty example, oh well, sorry. But I can literally sit there and binge on it and tweak on it and listen, because I'm trying to pay attention to how did they say that? What was the term that they used? And where is that term also found? And where is it not? What was the context of how that was used? But most importantly, the sound of how they speak, because it's so important. But anyway, that's my little 2 cents in response. So yeah, I would say, have plenty. Our language in Hawaii should be mainstream. It should be on mainstream TV, mainstream radio. But then again, this is where our people need to learn to be politically astute, as well as academically astute in affairs of our history, our language, and our context, because sometimes we get sucked into the vacuum, and then we only rotate in our silos, but we don't always see the bigger picture. And the conversations I find myself in are scary. So in order to get our Olelo back in even more mainstream, we have to be in political and economic control. Because right now, that's what dictates a lot of everything. Money determined this film. And so, again, with great appreciation to all that was done to make this film possible, all the little details that come out in the wash that people have contention with, a lot of it has to do with political and economic power. So if we're not able to talk about these things and to understand it, we're left way behind.
As I was watching the movie, I was, that series, I was looking around at the crowd, and some of them during the battle scenes were exasperated and shocked at the level of violence. And Kumungina, you touched on it a little bit about how you just don't have that desire to go into different parts of the culture. And I don't know if that's exactly what you were talking about or not, but how do we deal, okay, so this is ours. This is our makana, or our cultural property that we have rights over to own, have as our own when we go home. Now we have chiefs of war. And then there's going to be people talking on TikTok and Instagram and other places saying, oh, they're so violent. But like for us, for people like myself, that's part of our culture and our worldview, and it's part of who we are, and so I embrace it and love it. And I appreciate the storytelling to show the intricacy of the mentality that was going on with the battles, but how can we, and I'm not the type to verbalize when I'm offended or upset, I just will navigate internally and do what I need to do to avoid a situation, but how can we defend ourselves from those types of rhetoric, or those who are so politically inclined in the Lāhui? How can they verbalize themselves in that manner that it doesn't overreach the collective to say, this is who we are, and we're proud of it, we're going to stand by this bloodshed? Thank you.
May I answer you first?
Of course.
Sorry, I'm gonna all cheese this moment. If we look at America and we look at the things that are espoused by America, and if we look at any news, it is filled with violence, it is filled with all sorts of ills and nasties. So I dare challenge anyone to just go look in their own American backyard if that's their background, and look at other countries. And don't be commenting about our people or our history or anything, because the American lot is just, they're worse. They're the uncivilized ones.
I taught at the department called the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at UH Manoa for 9 years. I'm pretty much of a nonviolent advocate, but I actually think the violence in this has a silver lining, which is, and Lāhui will understand this better than anyone, that it counters the narrative of Hawaiians being feminized.
Ayo.
Yeah. The thing that was acceptable to the outside world and to those who encroached into Hawaii was hula, and things that were not a threat. In fact, I would even say that about hokulea, because I was once speaking to somebody who's a major media, head of media from a major organization, and it was right at the time when hokulea was coming back from the worldwide voyage, and I said, you know, there's so much unity around hokulea. Why couldn't it be like that for sovereignty? So aren't you so divisive? And she said, oh yeah, good luck with that. And then it kind of bothered me for a while, and I realized, yeah, the mainstream is okay with hokulea because it's out on the ocean, not on the land. They want the land. So it's okay for Hawaiians to be out on the ocean. And so it's a similar kind of dynamic there. So I think Chief of War will depict Hawaiians in their full their full capacity, kuekina, not what's been depicted, up to now.
Aloha. So Dr. Perkins had expressed some disappointment with the fact that there are a lot of Maori folks that were part of the cast for this series. And I read a few articles that had explained part of the reason why. Supposedly it has something to do with the law here, with the bill that was passed in legislature, where they can only do so much filming here in Hawaii and the taxes and what have you. I don't know the specifics of that. But my question is, how do you all feel in regards to that, as far as movie productions here in Hawaii? Should it be limited to a certain amount or a certain demographic, or and as far as the economy goes, do we want to have more and unlimited amount of filming here in the islands, or do we want to restrict that?
Are you asking someone in particular?
No, just anybody that wants it.
We definitely need more, no limits. As for, I mentioned earlier, and I'm glad to say this again, that Oceania is who we are. We're not alone here. We have one another across, we are connected by our water, by the ocean. It doesn't divide us, it connected us, and it continues to connect us. Earlier on, when it was, years ago, the controversy over Dwayne Johnson playing the role of King Kamehameha the Great, and the whole uproar of, oh, he's not Hawaiian, he's Samoan. Yet, in Kamehameha's own genealogy reaching back, Pili is one of his ancestors, and Pili comes from Samoa. Again, Oceania. Let's get past this limit that has been put us in a jar. You can only go so far in your thinking. Let's get past that and embrace one another through our oceans. Like Kuhina loves listening and examining all this language. She can cross those lines that we haven't crossed yet. And so I hope I'm answering your question or responding in a way that is helpful to engage. And as for war, the title already says what to expect. And actually, I remember telling Leilani and Shane, ooh, I don't know if I can sit through this, because I couldn't even sit through Saving Private Ryan. But I could sit through this, because it wasn't quite as graphic, I'm relieved, that as I had anticipated. The most they showed as far as was Purkahana. Oh my God, but just the title itself, Chief of War, tells us to expect war. And the methods of the weaponry and the lua, I would impose upon Kumu Ramsey to talk about that as a lua, not just practitioner, expert. To comment. Would you like to? Come on. Is it appropriate? Right here.
No, thank you. To the thought about violence, if you think, how many of you remember this guy named Bruce Lee? Yeah. Sifu Lee understood the American mind. And his whole thing was, by showing Americans Chinese Kung Fu, they would finally have an idea or be interested in Chinese culture. And many other people have done the same thing. And unfortunately, violence seems to be an attraction You know, at one point in time, news was only good news. Baby born, cow have baby cow, milk coming. But today, the news is always bad news. Right? We're trying to get the worst out of rather than the best. So war happens to be one of those messages. And unfortunately, if that's all we focus on, versus the aloha that Her Royal Highness is talking about, which I think all of us are aspiring to do, we miss the opportunity. How can we do that? And hopefully, we'll see some of those elements coming through in the film as we move through. The importance of the aloha, it's mentioned. Aloha for land, aloha for people, aloha for Ahupua, all of those types of things. But Lua itself, as a battle system, it's not a martial art. It's a way of being. And it is a violent practice. If you did this properly, somebody wasn't coming home. But the difference in our practice, in our culture worldview anyway, is that there was always hope one point. Because it was family. It was same people fighting one another. So at the end, once everything was done, we would go back to the practice of Ho'oponopono to bring everybody back in. But I can tell you, as a bone breaking, muscle manipulation, nerve manipulation, and spiritual manipulation, our system of Lua, depending on what school or what family you come from, can be this very violent thing. And so I'm glad they didn't pull it, although they didn't go as far as they could, but they did demonstrate that this is how we came together. But here's the focus. Kamehameha Kahi is often considered the conqueror. Just those terms alone take away from the idea that he was also a unifier. And so how we look at this from the worldview, which was mentioned earlier, is really critical. And how we move forward is recognizing that many of the questions we pose today are coming from the continental worldview rather than the island worldview, and from a colonized mind versus the mind of our kupuna. That temporal shift in the way we think, how we ask our questions, even these questions are already grounded in that colonized mind, even if we're fighting against it. So at some point in time, these kinds of opportunities help us to recognize that we can't clean the poison from inside the poison pond. And yet, none of us have been out there long enough, or with our kupuna long enough, to help us remember that. So hopefully these kinds of things begin to help us remember. And our practice of Lua and all of other cultural concepts and principles is really help us to stay connected to those kinds of things. As Kalanta Maoli. Mahalo.
For something to be good, it has to end on time. We are almost at the end of our time together with our esteemed panel. We'll take one last question, Hialani. Is there someone that has one last question?
This question, well, I have a couple, but I'm just more or less yes or no. And it has to do with the question you asked earlier about in the movie, was there some kind of cultural compromise? So with that in mind, I'm coming up with the idea about the timelines of the characters that are in the movie. I wasn't sure, and I couldn't an answer to that, was that supposed to be Kamahana who's getting his throat slit? And the age of Kai'ana in this movie seems, I don't know, out of character or out of time, or he looks much older than from what pictorial depictions we see in the one famous picture of Kai'ana. He looks much older in here, that's his role. And then the other question was, with regards to him being given back the bones of his father, I mean, did he not put that bone, the skull? Is that what we're looking at, a skull burning on the fire? So I just wanted to know if there was ever something like that. It was pretty blatant. I didn't know that could take place in our history. I pride myself of knowing some cultural history pretty well. I just never thought that would be something that I'd see. Aside from the fact that the battle scenes were relatively very good, watch a lot of that kind of stuff, but it kind of stops the brain because we don't see that because we've come a long way being colonized and complacent in that manner. But, you know, sometimes you get used to, the world had to get used to watching Utu when it first came out. It was pretty violent back in that day, and there's a series of films that came out after that. But I did notice in the film industry for Maori people, Maori production, and I met the director Selwyn who did that movie film, the launching of Maori culture took place because of this media. But if I need to go back, I would like to ask if those timelines with the characters involved were kind of relatively close, because I thought the age gap was huge, and with regards to his bones of his father being put on the pyre. And this is for Umi, if you know, if you could answer that.
I'll take the timeline question. Maybe somebody else can speak to the whole ED movement that can speak to proper treatment of that. But yeah, the timelines are tricky before Cook. And I think that's probably why they say in the very beginning, the late 18th century. Okay, so late 1700s. I've seen an estimate of Kahahana's death at 1773, just quite early, that's before Cook actually. And things are a little tricky before about 1780. So, but by then, Kalani Pupu has died around 1780 or 82. And that's kind of the beginning of Kamehameha's rise. This is all a little bit before that, and so the dates, very hard to put dates on these. We know the kind of the decade. And probably Jason Momoa is older than Kaiana was at the time that is depicted. He's 46, Jason. But it had to be him, right? No Jason, no Chief of War. That's what it is. Yeah, that's it.
I think that interesting to know too is because the actual lifespan of Kaiana was 42 years, I believe. And but what I'm getting at is that he is the grandson of Keawe Ikahiale Moku through Ahupua, who was a younger born child or son of his, of Keawe. Yet, when you go further up the timeline of his own life, when Keawe started having his grandson is Keawanui, right? Did I get that right? So, and for Kaiana is, even though he's the younger side of Keawe's life, is still older than Kamehameha I. Interesting, but that's how they rolled. That's how the Inuit rolled. They had children throughout their lives, like because the men could. So in the timeline, I think they could only do so much because, of course, Jason had to play Kaiana. And as for the bones and all, I wondered about that too, because perhaps it was a Mo'olelo that he carries in his own family. These are questions for him, and maybe he'll watch this and answer and let us know, because I would honor that, you know, because there are stories that we have in our own families that people do not know, and the nuances within the stories, which are fascinating, and it's time for the reveal, because then we get to really live our culture, live our lives together, and it's, why did we not know it, is the other question. Why did we not know it? Because it stopped being taught in the schools, because it couldn't speak the language, because you said, oh, don't tell your genealogies. Yet how could we go forward without knowing our genealogies? Who are our peoples? Who are the leaders from the leaders? We have a right to know. If anybody wants to know why I am who I am, genealogically, you have a right to know. I'm happy to share it. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not trying to prove anything except that we can share and know who we are. That old saying, to know where we came from, to know who we are, we know where we're going. So that is it's urgent already. Mahalo.
I just want to end with the EV part. We have a lot of EV projectors in this theater right now. And they want to hear from Hina what she thought of that. Is that something, it seemed like we were watching desecration happening on the screen. What are your thoughts? Is that something that was done? Burning the bones?
To remove flesh from the bones and then to properly wrap the EV. There were different ways to do it. One through fire. The placement of the skull as it was done, and we saw it, I too was curious about that because the limited accounts that I spent my time reading back in school, I didn't quite envision that it would be represented in that way. I would say this to everyone. We can very easily get into the weeds about accurate representation of things like this, but I think more important to consider is how do we take a film like this and how do we look at all of these little intimate details and what will that make us do about our own intimate knowledge of our practices? And so asking the question, I appreciate the question being asked of me. I cannot answer with full, how do I say it, fortitude in this, again, because I know that puhi ikiahi, to remove the flesh and then gathering the bones, that's an understanding that you can find within the context of our history. But to the specific placement of the way it was treated, so in film, this is where creative license in telling a story. As I mentioned earlier, a'ohe ka'ike kahalau ho'okai, as well as how do you communicate something and encapsulate it all to be digestible like this and to say how many seconds? How many seconds did we see that inside there? So even in my own film work, sometimes I remember in the Kapai Mahu short film, our animator told the story of transitioning from our political independence to being under the flag of the United States, and it was just this 2-second shh, and it fluttered the flag, and it faded in and faded out. But that's treatment. It's when you get into the nitty-gritty about making a film, you learn about how complex it is. And so again, when I saw that, I was like, I wonder what, and I would want to go back to the cultural team and ask them, do you know anything about that, Kumu? About the specific, when it comes to the hihi in that kind of placement, where being puhi kiahi. Yeah, and so again, that I would challenge everyone who has that question, let's go do our homework and let's go see what we can turn out. That way, when we look at this, if we're going to scrutinize something, it's because we actually try to do as much as we can. Because I can't tell you more than what I just said.
One of the things of this, when I watched the movie, was that Could he have done that because he wanted to prevent anyone else from desecrating his father's bones? Because when Kankili said, "This is your father's bones," right? And you think that, yeah. So that was as his son, to take his birthright over his father's own bones to take care of it so no one else could desecrate it. But we don't know that. It's only a question for Mr. Momoa. And was it from his mo'olelo? Because I don't know that history.
Well, we've all been given a challenge to dig in deeper, to find out these stories, to learn our language, to search our history, to seek out reputable sources of our culture. So we've all been given that challenge this evening, and it's been my pleasure to help host this celebrated and esteemed panel. So I ask Lāhui to please help me celebrate our honored panel. Your applause and aloha to Dr. Ubi Perkins, Monsignor Ong, Princess Salazar, Princess Ron, and Rani Patel, and Honolulu.
Thank you so much. I want to just mahalo everyone who came. We had 182 people who checked in today, so that was awesome. And mahalo to the panelists. Thank you so much for lending your expertise. I have a feeling that this series will have profound effects on our Lāhui going forward. Unforeseen things we don't even know that's gonna come out of this. I was asked by someone to just say a few words about some concerns you had.
Aloha. I just wanted to bring up something real quick, and I appreciate the time to give given the opportunity, but not everybody knows Jason Momoa. He's in the Palestinian community. We know that he is a supporter of Israel. And as I just wanted to ask the panelists, whether mana'o, how important is it to support Hawaiian sovereignty as well as our cousins, other indigenous communities? As Her Royal Highness Oana had mentioned, we are cousins in the Oceania, but what about our relatives elsewhere? Like the Falahi, Medini, Bedouin in the Middle East. They are suffering because of U.S. involvement. Our colonizers are the same people. And I just wanted to know if we could share some mana'o on that.
Thank you, Raquel. I know we've run out of time, and I just want to leave your question out there, and maybe we can just ponder on this. And mahalo for sharing and your bravery in sharing that question. And because I want to honor everybody's time here. We do have to be out of here like soon. But thank you guys so much, and thank you so much, Raquel. And Raquel was one of the volunteers as well, so mahalo to Raquel. Again, our live stream has gotten a lot of hits, and I think hopefully, this has been a good, constructive, educational discussion. And one of the goals from Kalahui Hawaii for this event was to address some of the pitfalls and to start the conversation. We won't be having another forum like this again on this series, but it was just to start the conversation. I mean, let's start looking at things, makavalu, right? I mean, we have to look at it at all angles. And as Raquel has brought up too, those are issues that some in our community have. And I want to mahalo everybody for coming and take some food home. I think we got extra food, and have a safe ride home. And thank you so much, Elana. You did a great job. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a big hand.
have mine on my phone.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Finally over. Thank you so much for all your